Hello. I'm going to talk to you today about my father and grandfather a little bit to give you a sense of family history. So let me begin. My father's name is Frank. That's how you know him. He was born Francesco DiBisceglie. That's his name that he was given. Now, the tradition that I learned and his father learned and my father learned was that the firstborn child, the firstborn male child, is named after the father's father. For example, my name, Cataldo, named after my grandpa, Cataldo DiBisceglie. My father kept the tradition. His father, this is the interesting thing, his father named my dad Francesco, Frank, and his father's name was Christopher. He'd had a falling out with his father, and this was a big sign of disrespect. He named my father Frank after his brother and not after his father. So it was a big deal. It was a big sign of disrespect. Now, let me talk to you a little about my grandfather. He came to the United States in the mid-1920s to seek his fame and fortune. This was probably connected to his falling out with his father because his father wanted him to be a farmer and work the land, which most of the people in Cataldo did. But Grandpa did not want to hear of it. So he wanted to seek his fortune, make his fortune elsewhere. So he came to the United States and he did whatever he had to do. He was kind of an entrepreneur looking for opportunities. My father recounted that he heard that there was work in the coal mines of West Virginia. And he got on a bus from New York City and went to West Virginia and was hired as a person working in the mines. Now, he didn't speak English. They gave him a little tag to identify who he was. He would be paid by shoveling coal into these bins that were on little like railroad tracks that they had in the mine. And you'd fill a bin, put your tag on it, and that would identify who did the work and how he should be paid. So because he spoke no English, people basically ripped him off and took advantage of him. They'd take the tag away and put somebody else's tag on it, and he'd work and work, and the money wouldn't be there. So that didn't sit well with him. And then there was a cave-in that occurred. My grandfather wasn't in the cave-in, but he was there when there was a cave-in. And he decided this was not for him. It was too dangerous. He wasn't being paid fairly. So he got on a bus and he went back to New York. So Grandpa gravitated into the ice business. Now, in New York at the time, a lot of the people from Cataldo went into the ice business. Now, why is that? Well, number one, and I guess it's pretty important, it didn't require a lot of money. The big requirement was your willingness to work long hours and work very hard. So a lot of the buildings were these 6-story cold water flats, tenements. They weren't heated. There was no elevator. You just walked up 6 flights of stairs if you lived on the top floor. So people delivering ice would have to carry 30, 40, 50 pounds of ice on their back and walk these stairs and deliver it to their customers. And Grandpa was among them. So he did that. He got himself a route. It was on East 65th Street between York and First Avenues in Manhattan. So the geography of it will be important in a minute. So when my father was 15, Grandpa decided that he should have his son come over and help him work his business. And he went back to Italy, got my father, and brought him to America. My father recounts that the boat docked, and the very next morning he was working with his father. So he wasn't there on a vacation. So when my father was when he was 18, there was an incident in which I find very amusing. He went to jail with my father. My father went to jail with his father, excuse me. So they had a business. It was on East 65th Street between York and First Avenue. The geography was that the street sloped down toward the Hudson River. So in those days, they would have ice delivered to them, which they would resell. So the company's name was Knickerbocker Ice Company. And a truck would come and they would drop off 300-pound blocks of ice and put it on the sidewalk. And then my father and his father would take an ice pick and ice tongs and cut the ice up and put it into tubs. And they had a cart. They had this metal cart, and they would walk to wherever it was and deliver their ice. So they rented a basement in this building, and they lived there and they worked the business from there. But in the summer, when the weather was warmer, the Knickerbocker Ice Company would drop the ice onto the sidewalk and it would start to melt. And the owner of the building was a Jewish guy, and he complained to my grandfather all the time about the water and how it was going to hurt his sidewalk, yada, yada. And he was just a little too much for my grandfather to take. So Grandpa decided, screw you, and he moved to the next building. He rented a room in the basement of the building next door, which was uphill from where he had been. Knickerbocker Ice Company would drop the ice. It would be on the sidewalk, not on the old former landlord's property, but water following gravity would travel downhill. And the Jewish guy would complain and complain to my grandfather again and again and again. So one day, Grandpa flipped out. He'd had enough, and he took the ice tongs, which were cast iron, and they had little hooks on the end that you could grab the ice with. And he swung it at the guy, and he hooked him in the ass, and there's this whole big brouhaha. My father, who was 18, tried to intervene to stop his father from hurting this guy. And my grandfather was just blind with rage, and he swung the ice tongs, and my father was in the way. He had his hands up defensively, and he got a gash in his forearm. And in the meantime, the cops were called. They came and they arrested my grandfather and my father, and they hauled them off. So they went to Lower Manhattan, to a place called the Manhattan Detention Center, which is commonly known as the Tombs, and they spent the night in jail. And the next day, I don't know if they made bail or somebody made bail for them, but bail was posted, and they got out, and they went back to their apartment on East 65th Street and continued working their business. So one of my grandfather's customers was a lawyer, and he'd heard about the incident, and he asked my grandfather what had taken place. So he and my father told him what happened, and he said that he would fix it. So he knew the landlord of the building, the guy who was in the incident, the guy who got hooked in the ass with the ice tongs, and he smoothed it over, and the Jewish guy dropped the charges. So there was no further repercussion about this incident. There was no court date, court trial, etc., etc. So after it was all said and done, the former landlord became my grandfather's friend. I guess he figured better to be on the good side of Cataldo DiBisceglie than on the wrong side. And I think his butt must have hurt him for a while. So that's the story of my father and my grandfather spending the night in jail in Manhattan. Another story that I would like to tell you is, I guess in general, my grandfather was a guy who looked to make money. That was his reason for being in the United States. So at Christmas time, in addition to selling ice and kerosene, which they sold to people because some people heated their apartments with kerosene heaters because they were called cold water flats. There was no central heat in them. At Christmas time, he would sell Christmas trees. And they would go to the freight yard, which was on the west side of Manhattan, where I guess the railroad cars came down, which is, I think, the current Javits Center occupies that space. Well, they went to the freight yard, and you could buy full, pretty trees at one price, which were high, or you could buy, quote unquote, seconds, which were not as full, not as pretty, but they were cheap. So my grandfather, being the entrepreneur that he was, he bought the seconds, and he had a little hand boring drill. It wasn't even electric. And they would take a tree and break off some of the branches, and they would have another tree, which was kind of skimpy, and they would drill a hole and put in branches and make a tree. And my grandfather would sell them. So he was a guy that was out to make a buck. Interesting story, though. My father, who acquired the habit of drilling the trees and making a full one out of a skimpy one, when I was a child, and my sisters probably will remember this, they'd buy a tree, and if there was a skimpy part, my father would cut a piece of the branch from the side of the tree that would be against the wall and not visible, and he would take an electric drill and he would drill a hole in the trunk and stick the little branch in. And I remember this vividly, every Christmas growing up. You'd hear the Christmas tree would come in the house, they would set it up on the stand, and out comes the drill, and my father would be at work creating his masterpiece of Christmas. So these are little stories that I just wanted to share with you to give you kind of a sense of your history, and I hope you enjoyed it.